later session. So Webb, do we have you online? Maybe we don't.
He said he was waiting to be.
Nope, I was muted. I was muted.
Okay, no,
User.
that's all right.
User error.
Do you have video to share, or will it?
Yeah,
be,
I can.
will it?
I've got a kind of a I wanted to keep it pretty loose, so I have very kind of a minimal presentation that I'm happy to share.
That's fine by me. Do you have the ability to share your slides?
Let's see if I can. Can you see
that?
that?
We can see
fantastic. Fantastic.
All right, the floor is yours. Thank you, Webb.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for that introduction about Pablo and myself. This is kind of something in the last 5 years. Pablo and I actually met at a workshop for the UNOLS fleet, RV Tech, much like this, and we kind of looked at each other and said, you know what, you and I are kind of working towards the same goals, and so we kind of teamed up, and we've started what we tentatively call the Ocean Data Tools project, which is encompasses OpenRV-DAS, OpenVDM, C-Log, and it's all open source, all MIT licensed. I've included the link on this opening slide, oceandatatools.github.io. That'll kind of give you an overview of the first of the 3 projects with links to the GitHub repo, and all the installation information is all there. So thank you very much for that introduction about Pablo and I. We're really grateful to be included in this. We're both very passionate about helping to provide, enterprise quality tools to the community, to help the community, continue in its endeavors. So yeah, super happy about that. So yeah, a little bit about me. I've been, my email address is oceandatarat@gmail. I've been doing data management for almost 20 years now, starting back in 2003 as a ROV pilot, kind of ad hoc video engineer, and the only person who was comfortable in command line on the ship. And so therefore I was kind of immediately kind of thrust into it, but I've really enjoyed it. From those beginnings, my first real data management job was on the NOAA ship Okeanos Explorer, which is where the initial kind of spark for this whole OpenVDM really kind of started. I think it's important to understand the driving force behind OpenVDM. I think it's important to understand why. Why did it come to be? Okeanos at the time, and this was 2008, 2010, when that ship kind of came online, that ship was trying to do something really unique. It had the first EM-304 ever built. It had a dedicated ROV. We were doing high definition video. We were streaming it. Before we could do YouTube, we were literally having to build our own content distribution networks to get it around the world, and it was very challenging, but it was very rewarding, and it highlighted a lot of problems that needed to be overcome. In 2010, we were generating on that particular vessel, between the EM-304 and the high definition video, we were generating 600 gigabytes to 1 terabyte a day, which was a lot in 2010. And even more daunting actually was the fact that we had to give copies of that data to the host country, to visiting scientists. And this was back in the days of USB 1.1, USB 2, FireWire 400. So it quickly became apparent that if we weren't putting the computers to work doing the data management, when we left the dock, we were never going to catch up. And so that's kind of really where all this came. It's like, okay, we need to put the computers to work. We need to have systems in place where with minimum input, the data is just organized, or we're notified as to why it's not organized. And we need to be making copies of these terabyte data sets. We need to start making those copies as quickly as possible. So that was kind of and a little bit more about Okeanos to kind of highlight its mission, which kind of ties into some of the ship to shore needs and those the tricks that I mentioned in the last session. This boat was purpose-built to do telepresence-enabled ocean exploration. The TRDL on that is basically the ship only sailed with 2 scientists. And as great as that might sound, there was 60 plus scientists on shore. These were not passive viewers, these were active participants. When we were deciding where to map, they were on conference calls, kind of driving the show. When we were underwater, they were, you know, their mic was in the 2 scientists on board, as well as the entire ROV team. They were in their ear, kind of driving the show. You know, do we go left? Do we go right? Grab this rock, grab that coral, and whatnot. The boat was running 24/7. If the vehicle wasn't in the water, the EM-304 was pinging away at the next site. There were people, it was multidisciplinary. So we had people that were really interested in the mapping. We had people that were really interested in what the RV was doing. We had people that were really interested in what the RV brought up. So it was this 24-hour show that was primarily driven from shore. And so that whole paradigm was absolutely dependent on having a consistent flow of well-organized data and information. I was the only one on board doing the data management, and I need sleep. So I did that on Okeanos from 2008 to 2013, at which time I had decided the stuff that we were doing on the Okeanos, I did that. We got that program up and running. It was very successful. My last cruise, actually, there were 101 shoreside scientists. That was kind of a big milestone for us to hit triple digits. We also hit like 50 million views on our stream, or no, 5 million views. So again, big milestones for 2013. And I decided at that point, I wanted to take the lessons that I'd learned. I was presenting at conferences, and I saw that the challenges that we were figuring out on Okeanos really were applicable to a broader community that was starting to follow suit with the multidisciplinary, the ship to shore, the wanting tools to help organize the data. And so I actually left NOAA with the idea that I would actually take those lessons. With the blessing of NOAA, I basically took the lessons learned there and from scratch rewrote that tool, and that became OpenVDM. OpenVDM, for those who don't know what the VDM stands for, that's vessel data management. And so I left in 2013, but I'd already kind of started thinking about leaving. And so I started development of the tool in 2012. And I'm based in Rhode Island, United States. The RV Endeavors, the University of Rhode Island's vessel. I have a great working relationship with those techs. And so RV Endeavor and RV Falcor, or Falcor Classic, as it's referred to at SOI, became the 2 test platforms. So real quick, again, for those that aren't familiar with OpenVDM, I think and this is the #1 misunderstanding that comes up, is what OpenVDM is not. A lot of people, when the OpenVDM comes up, their go-to is, no, we're already using RVDAS, or we're already using, you know, WinFrog or SCS or some other logger. That is not what OpenVDM is. OpenVDM is not a data acquisition system like WinFrog, like SIS, like SCS, like UHDAS, CSAVE, etc. It does not write ones and zeros to files. It is a data management system, meaning that it manages the files created by users, individuals, and other data acquisition systems. And they can be underway systems like OpenRVDAS. They can be frame grabbers, video recorders, multi-unit acquisition systems, anything that generates a file that needs to be managed. In addition to the management side, so it goes out, it grabs the files, and it organizes it as the vessel dictates it wants it organized. So it can reach out, it can go to any system it can connect to a system. If it's a Windows machine, it can connect to it via Samba. If it's a Linux machine, it can do rsync directly if they're running an rsync server. If they're not running an rsync server, they can do SSH over rsync. It can do, if for whatever reason it needs to be locally mounted via NSF or something like that, it can absolutely support that. It basically requires to connect to a remote machine. It doesn't require installing any software on that remote machine. It can do it all. As long as the network security is open, it can connect remotely without having to install any software. Any data that is managed by OpenVDM is immediately made available to shipboard personnel via Samba and HTTP Apache file listing. The HTTP is natively read-only. The Samba share is read-only as well. And so basically OpenVDM is providing an immediate, safe access to all the files, collected the data as soon as they're available. So no more did a CTD cast in the middle of the night and somebody has to get woken up because somebody doesn't know how to pull the files off the CTD server kind of thing. So it's a way to provide a portal to the users where they've got access to the latest and greatest, and the techs don't have to worry about any security or accidental fat fingering or mistypes or whatnot. As I talked about earlier, it also has the functionality to make copies of all or a subset of the data. So if a particular science party isn't interested in multi-beam or isn't interested in ROV video and doesn't want to spend the money to buy a hard drive array that can swallow it all, you can create backups in OpenVDM to make either an entire or a subset of that copy to that destination. Similar to pulling files in, those destinations, that can be array to array, if it's NFS or it has a Samba share or SSH or rsync or anything, it can connect to those destinations the same way that it can connect to the sources. And it's actually not incredibly sophisticated in terms of what it's looking at. So for instance, if you, for whatever reason, it was real important to get a small file like XBTs or something that size to shore, OpenVDM doesn't care if you say, hey, I want you to connect to this device via SSH. It doesn't care if that device is on the ship. So we've actually used that in the past. We've actually used OpenVDM's cruise data backup functionality or cruise data transfer functionality to actually push in real time reasonably sized data sets to a shore-based server. And it even includes, when you set that up, it actually even includes a bandwidth throttle to make sure you don't absolutely saturate your outbound pipe. OpenVDM is also incredibly useful for systems that you want to control the file naming convention, or your program has a file naming convention where either there's a 3-digit sequential number, or you want to include the cruise ID in the file name. You can actually set up that type of functionality, and when you set up OpenVDM, so that OpenVDM will actually, when it goes to pull files, it'll actually take note of what the files are named and actually notify the tech of like, hey, I grabbed these files, but I saw these other files that don't match the naming conventions that you've defined. I just want you to be aware of that. I'm not going to move them because they don't match. But if you fix those, once you fix those and the file names are compliant, then I'll pull them into the system. So as I believe you, and I apologize because I don't know the name, but our host, is that Jonathan?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Nice to meet you. So as Jonathan highlighted earlier, it helps us get ahead of the problem. So if a bad file name gets pulled into the pipe and subsequent processes are done on that based on a bad file name, well, when you finally notice that and correct it, you've essentially got to backtrack and fix all those intermediate steps. And so with OpenVDM helping the vessels enforce naming conventions and directory conventions and all that, we can stay ahead of it. We can prevent files from getting into a pipeline until they match the program's naming convention standards. There we go. Beyond the core functionality, which is pulling files in and pushing files out, OpenVDM does have a couple of tools and processes happening in the background that provide extra value-added functionality to vessels that want to put in the time to use them. It has a framework, and this is actually, we talked about this a little on the ship-to-shore stuff, where you can set up pipelines that they're passed a raw file as part of that transfer, and you can pass that file into what's referred to in the OpenVDM paradigm as a data dashboard plugin. And it will process that file and build a JSON representation of that file that's appropriate for displaying in a web interface. So it's JSON. You can define how much you want to subsample it. You can do some other stuff in the background, but it gives you a mechanism to build that product as it comes in, as the new files come in, to build that reduced file size, optimized product, as you go. It's not limited to real time, or sorry, it's not limited to time series. That functionality does extend, is available to any file format. So if you want to use something like MV Systems and GDAO to do a first order rasterization of a multi-beam file to build you a geotiff that you can run into a pipe server or a tile server, absolutely. You can use OpenVDM to do that. And so that way you can essentially in near real time populate a shipboard tile server showing the multi-beam data that you just collected, and you can do it completely hands-off. The plugin architecture with the visualization, it also has kind of placeholders for running QA tests and collecting file level statistics, and a mechanism for displaying that in a web interface in OpenVDM. In addition to that plugin architecture for doing the downsampling, you can use the kind of a superset of that functionality to hook in anything you want. We actually call them hooks. So for instance, it's like, okay, I don't want you to build this downset sample. What I want you to do is I want you to convert this GGA into KML. And I want that to be another product, and I want that product stored here. And so you can use these hooks that are available at different milestones within the cruise to basically automate data processing workflows. Examples of hooks locations are start of cruise, end of cruise, anytime a transfer is run, anytime the plugins actually run. So if you want to use the plugin to create a GeoJSON or KML file from a GGA file, and you want to combine the GeoJSON files that you've created for all your GGA files into one cruise level KML, you can absolutely do that using the hooks architecture. That's just kind of wired in. The way you kind of do all that is all actually driven from a configuration file. So the vessel operators just write the process that they want to use, and they just insert that process name and any command line arguments that need to be applied into a YAML file within OpenVDM, and that's the extent of wiring in the functionality. Tess, actually, I saw your hand raised in chat. I saw your comment. Thank you very much on this last one. Is the whole RESTful API that OpenVDM supports. So if you do want to have third-party systems that want quick access to what's the current expedition ID, or what are the cruise start and stop dates, or where are the OpenRV files stored in the cruise data directory, that's all information that's available from a REST API that OpenVDM provides. So it allows you to basically, set up once and use many times throughout the vessel that cruise level, expedition level information. Let's see. Why is this useful? I mean, I think we're all pretty aware of this, but saves time, improves consistency, improves data awareness, both in terms of what data is coming in and what data needs to be sorted out. Improves access for scientists. No more getting woken up in the middle of the night. Scientists know that, hey, I go to this IP address or mount this Samba share, and I know whatever's there is what's available. No point to bug the text. It provides opportunities for vessels to automate data workflows. And and the last one, and I apologize, I think I put this slide together last night, late after traveling. The remote support. It was also, Jonathan, you also mentioned about the whole limited bandwidth. All of these tools, CLOG, OpenVDM, OpenRV, these are tools that would not require an application. These are tools that can be entirely configured and actually can be entirely installed, configured, operated, maintained, troubleshot over low bandwidth connections. When I first got going in this in 2013 with Endeavor, Endeavor had a 128 kilobit connection, and there was nothing I couldn't do from my desk in Rhode Island that I could do if I was sitting on the boat, even over 128 kilobit connection. So all these tools were built to be an incredibly low bandwidth to maintain, troubleshoot, and all that, because that is very, very important. Starlink has kind of made that less and less relevant, but I think in the high latitudes, as I've seen this as well, there is still a need to be able to support these tools over low, in some cases, intermittent connectivity. From Endeavor and Falcor, a number of vessels, manned and autonomous, are now using OpenVDM. As someone said, how does this pertain to Polar? I just did an install on the Healy, if that helps. So that, ironically, Healy had 5 Starlinks, which I thought was hilarious. I guess that's, for anyone who's worked in government, they know why. But yeah, this is the kind of the extent. Peter and Tess reached out several years ago now about using OpenVDM on their vessel, and I was super excited about that. They were actually the first vessel to do the install and the configuration almost entirely without me. I've yet to actually touch that system remotely or in person. I'm kind of saddened about that because I really want to go to Hobart. But it definitely proved that this is not you're not hooked in to contacting the developer to set this up. The documentation is good enough. There is an install script. This is something that can be installed, configured, and managed without contacting me, much to my own chagrin. Saildrone kind of represents a bit of an edge case. They were in a situation where they needed to manage a lot of data. They were used to being a very simple platform, and as they added multi-beam systems like a 2040 and a 304 and Norbits, they needed a way to manage the data, and they were interested in some of the pipeline stuff. And so OpenVDM and OpenRVDAS actually are now deployed on their Bathy-centric Surveyor and Voyager drones. So we've done a lot of talking. That was a lot of information. I'm going to go a little deeper dive into some of the scenarios I outlined. But before I do that, I wanted to just, if anybody's got any questions, or if we want to make this start some discussion, I'd be happy to field questions and do what I can.
Anybody in the room with any questions? So in just sort of the nutshell, this application framework provides, and feel free to correct me if I'm missing anything, but it provides management and access, but also, sort of that ability to transfer things in low bandwidth environments as well. And you can think of the advantages of not needing to send all of your scientists all the time. Instead, they can, if you need somebody to come in and take a look at something, they would be able to support it from shore. But again, the nutshell is that this provides an accepted, customizable open source framework for helping to manage and access this information. So questions from the floor for Webb, otherwise he can continue on. Yes, Alex.
A quick one from me. Does it remove files from local acquisition systems?
If you want to,
go on. Sorry.
No. Finish your question. Sorry.
Yeah, just in the scenario where your local acquisition machine is filling up and you've confirmed the transfer over to your central storage.
Yes, when you set up the nomenclature in OpenVDM is you have collection system transfer and cruise data transfer. A collection system transfer is pulling data from a data acquisition system. A cruise data transfer is pushing it to a backup location. In your collection system transfer, one of the options in the web interface is delete files on transfer. And so you can, as an option, you can have OpenVDM delete the file once it's successfully transferred to the to what's referred to as the data warehouse, the primary location where OpenVDM stores its data. Yes, it can do that. That feature was actually, that was a very recently added feature because of a data acquisition system that was doing exactly that. It was filling up incredibly fast, and they needed a way to automatically make sure that there was enough space for the next file. Yep, great question.
Just as a follow-on from that, does it have the ability to leave the files on the local system for a period of time, user-definable time, for purposes for where you want, where you've got certain software running on local acquisition machines that would need access locally to that data?
Right. There's two ways to handle that. It can be done. One of the things that it can do, and you kind of hinted at it, I don't think this was your primary question, but you kind of hinted at it. There are certain applications where you don't want the file backed up until the acquisition system is done writing to it.
Yep.
You don't want to grab a file mid-file. OpenVDM, you can tell OpenVDM not to do that. And OpenVDM will basically look at the file, they're like, hey, is that file still growing? Yes, okay, I'm going to leave you alone. When you're done growing, then I'll grab you. So that kind of helps on the whole grabbing the file mid-write. On the periodic cleanup, automated periodic cleanup, the way that OpenVDM could handle it, and there's pros and cons to doing this way, but one way it could do is, I mentioned the whole hooks architecture, whereby basically you can hook in processes at key milestones during the cruise. You could set up a hook at the beginning of every cruise. That hook actually, because it's got all the connection information to all these remote systems, you could set up a hook whereby it deletes any file older than X number of days at the beginning of each cruise. And so basically the data would stay there. No data would be deleted until the next cruise was started, because logically that is probably the next point at which you need to be concerned about running out of file space. So that's something that you could do. The way that I've seen that done that doesn't involve OpenVDM, because I'm all about, the best tool in the toolbox is the one that gets used, I've helped clients set up cron jobs to just delete files older than 90 days. But if you wanted to use OpenVDM, like I said, if you were in a situation where you were going away, the ship was going into dry dock or whatnot, but you wanted to keep your files until the next cruise when you actually needed space, then you absolutely could set up a hook that on the start of a new cruise, it goes in and it deletes files older than a certain date, just using the standard like command line tools. You could even go so far as, if you wanted to kind of be more specific, if you weren't concerned about the age of the file, you're more concerned about available hard drive space, then you could easily modify that script that you wire in OpenVDM to delete until X number of gigabytes is free, as opposed to until any file older than 90 days is gone. So depending on what the real need is there, I think there's mechanisms to support that.
Cool, thank you. One more, just about, do you store file level checksums so you could then trace it provenance reasons through until you get it back to shore as well?
Yep, great question. Actually, that is included. So basically, any file that gets transferred, OpenVDM uses its own hook architecture internally. So there's an MD5 checksum process that is hooked into the post-transfer hook. So basically, at the end of a transfer, OpenVDM passes a file manifest. It's like, these files were transferred, I've never seen them before, and these files were transferred and they're just updated from previous versions. And that file manifest gets passed to MD5 to the MD5 checksum command line utility, builds an MD5 checksum and adds it to the MD5 summary manifest for the entire cruise. You can also specify, as part of that process, MD5 is great and is really great in theory. It's got some interesting edge cases in practice, especially when you start dealing with larger data sets. because your MD5 checksum is, of course, the time needed to create an MD5 checksum is dependent on the file size. For time series stuff, where you're talking tens of megabytes, perfect, great, do it all day. When you start getting into 4K video files that are 8 gigabytes in size, you start to get bottlenecked. It starts to take an exorbitant amount of time to generate the MD5 checksum on that. What OpenVDM does to kind of balance it out is while you do lose the MD5 checksum file transfer verification functionality, if you just want to make sure that you got all the files that you think you should get in OpenVDM as part of that MD5 checksum, you can actually specify a file size threshold where basically OpenVDM will add the file to the manifest, but it won't generate the checksum if the file is over a certain threshold. And so that's kind of your balance point is, of performance and functionality.
You had a question?
Yeah, and I apologize if it was mentioned already, but I'm looking at this list. And I'm wondering if there are any non-US users or potential users of OpenVDM that you could identify.
So the Australian Arctic Division's Nuyina is an Australian example.
Okay.
I can speak to some of the others.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Ocean Explorer is registered in Malta. I mean, it's a U.S. owner, but internationally, a Norwegian vessel was using it. They did an install themselves, and I found out through like third party. I haven't had any interaction with the vessel. I don't know if they're still using it, but no, Peter and Tess, they were, and I was super excited about this. They were the first international user to like formally say, hey, we're going to be using it. But I'm interested in more. I've been trying. Anybody that wants to use it, I'm more than happy to help them use it. I mean, it's as far from a licensing standpoint and from like is there any reason that a foreign vessel couldn't use it? I can't think of any. It's an open source project based on other open source projects with an MIT based open source license. So I don't see any legal reasons why anyone in the world couldn't use it.
Any other questions, or will that Web continue? Okay, I think it's back to you, Web.
All right. So what I'd like to do now is I'd kind of like to talk through some ways that OpenVDM is typically extended on some research vessels to help simplify their workflows. So the four that I see the most are helping with multi-beam shipboard multi-beam processing, doing QA tests, helping with start of crews, remote database or directory creation on remote systems, and integration with OpenRV DAS. So multi-beam processing. Let's kind of work through that. Several of the vessels that I work with, they process their multi-beam data. They need to process their multi-beam data while it's being, or as soon as they can, when it's being collected, because the products from that multi-beam data are going to be used on the next ROV dive, or in some way dictate what the boat's going to do next. And so they use OpenVDM's functionality to not copy files that are still growing, to help the multi-beam processors not process a file that's ultimately going to result in a gap. So for everybody that, we all have been there where we're processing a batch of multi-beam files, we grab the most recent 10 files, we process them, we put the product in another folder, we grab the next 10 that have arrived since we did the last batch, we process them, and we realize there's a gap between the two sets. And that gap exists between the two sets because that last file that we grabbed from the first set wasn't done writing. That file was still growing. And so now there's a gap between where the last piece of data that was in that file and the first piece of data in the next set. And so using OpenVDM's, don't copy unless it's stopped growing functionality, the mapping team avoids the frustration of having to do duplicate work. because they know it's like, if I'm grabbing the multi-beam file, the raw file from the OpenVDM data warehouse, I know that these files are done being written to. That's guaranteed. So that's a very common, and that's also used on anything that is it has to be processed in situ, and you need to wait for the file to be finished. That same mechanism works there as well. Running QA tests, file level QA tests in situ. This is another way. This uses that plugin architecture that I mentioned earlier. And I heard R2R mentioned earlier as well. R2R has a R2R like a navigation QA utility. I'm drawing a blank as to what it's called. It's like, it might be R2R Nav Manager. This is a PHP-based tool for doing first order QA testing on position data, GGA data in particular, and it generates a report. You can use the plugin architecture in OpenVDM to, as GGA files arrive, you can actually pass those files straight into R2R's tool so that you're doing QA as you go. You're not waiting until 3 days later to figure out that your GGA says you're over Topeka, Kansas. You can get that information in near real time. It doesn't even have to wait until the file's done, because GGA, you can grab it anytime. You can actually be running that test every 5 minutes and testing the most recent 5 minutes of that file to figure out if you've got a problem. The same applies to any time series or anything that you can devise a QA test for. You can use that plugin architecture to wire in your bespoke QA testing. And there's a mechanism within OpenVDM to actually build a QA dashboard that actually shows you on a file by file level how the file did against a particular QA test. And that's used on a number of vessels. Remote data creation. I did hear mention about there is, depending on the ship, there's a lot of setup at the beginning of a cruise, a lot of opportunity, a lot of manual setup, a lot of opportunity to fat finger directory structures, to fat finger files and whatnot. You can use, again, the hook architecture in OpenVDM, and also because it knows where the files should be, so long as your permissions are set up, you can actually have OpenVDM, and I included utility. There's a utility for doing this in the default distribution of OpenVDM, where you can define a directory structure that you want set up on all these different remote stations. You can also include like boilerplate reports. So if there's like a spreadsheet or a document or something like that, where at the beginning of every cruise you copy from the template, you give the file the expedition or cruise ID, as a prefix to the file, and you save it in a particular place. You can use OpenVDM to streamline your start of cruise setup, and with regards to that. If you've got the tools, if you want to take it a step deeper and actually set up acquisition systems and stuff like that, or you can do that remotely, then you can absolutely use the same mechanism to wire in those additional tools to further set up your ship at the beginning of the cruise. And that actually segues into the last point, which is the OpenRV DAS integration. And so on multiple vessels, when you start a cruise in OpenVDM, it will actually rebuild the OpenRV DAS configuration file to do things like we can change where we want the file saved on the OpenRV DAS computer, OpenRV DAS installation, or in most cases, vessel operators, wherever possible, they want to include the cruise ID in the data file. And so we can use this mechanism so that we rebuild the OpenRV DAS config so that it includes any data files that OpenRV DAS writes are prefixed with the expedition ID. And so those are just 4 quick examples of how OpenVDM can be extended to further help automate and streamline pre-cruise and during cruise operations. Same thing can be said on post-cruise. And we actually do use this on a couple of ships where we want the cruise scratch disk. This is where people post pictures, post intermediate data products, things that should be included with the cruise archive, but needs to be reset for the next cruise. We actually use OpenVDM's end of cruise hook to move that data from that scratch disk into a specified subdirectory within the cruise data directory structure and wipe it for the next cruise. We're kind of almost done here, but what's on the horizon for OpenVDM? OpenVDM, some of that code does still date back hard to 2012. It's aged well, but it's aged. It's continued to do its job, but it could definitely use from a technological refresh as some of the products technologies that it's built on are approaching end of life. And so I'm looking, still doing like the initial R&D of developing OpenVDM 3. It's going to have all the functionality of the current, and I'm looking to extend it to meet the needs that I'm seeing coming out of the oceanographic community, the US oceanographic community at least, and kind of set it up well for the next decade. This includes, it's going to be almost a complete rewrite. I'm looking to simplify the technologies that are currently in it to a almost pure Python-based backend. Through my development of CLog, I've really kind of, bought into Node.js and the React framework for having very robust front ends, interactive front ends. And so I'll be looking to move OpenVDM to, and Fast API is actually the backend infrastructure that I'm looking to leverage, which is a RESTful API driven Python-based server-side framework. As part of that, it'll improve the API. Right now, the current API is very read-only. There's not any modification functionality, and I want to be able to change that. I want to be able to give vessels the opportunity to further automate their use of OpenVDM by being able to actually drive OpenVDM from a script or command line or whatever mechanism, a physical button, whatever they want, and that'll happen through by moving the Fast API and improving the API calls that are available. And with that will come as a requirement. It also means I've got to build a authentication backend, so not anybody can modify OpenVDM from a script. And so there's a lot of work that'll go into that. The other thing that I'm seeing more and more, and I did hear this mentioned about vehicles, is currently OpenVDM will support a single vehicle. So if you're a vessel that has a dedicated ROV like Falcor and Nautilus, and some of the other vessels that have dedicated ROV platforms, I'm seeing more and more multi-vehicle ships. The Ocean X platform, they're 2 subs, an ROV, and an AUV. And they're already asking, it's like, well, it does a great job supporting our ROV. Why can't we, we want OpenVDM to also be able to support our other vehicles. And so I'm looking to add multi-vehicle support where you can basically define, as needed, you can define the number of platforms that you have on your vessel. And you can individually define deployments for those platforms and have OpenVDM understand, okay, this data set is associated with this platform, and therefore I'm going to call out the files associated with this deployment on that platform. So that's a pretty big development effort. And then, as we talked about last session, cloud is more and more on the forefront of what people want to do. And so I'll be looking into using things like rclone and AWS Copy and some of these other tools for doing straight to cloud pushes, which I'm actually super excited about. And with that, that's pretty much everything I can talk about OpenVDM. There are, if you go to that website at the beginning, There is a link to a page that'll link you to all the repos. OpenVDM is one of those repos. If you go through the main page, you will see a link to a demo site. And so you're more than happy to play with that. I'm more than happy if anybody at any point wants to reach me and wants to talk through OpenVDM, I'm more than happy to do it. That's not a sales pitch. That's just because I'm super excited to work on this stuff. I really do love it. And I'm happy to answer any questions at any time. But with that, given this as a discussion, I didn't know if we wanted to do kind of around the room and talk about what people are using. And because I always learn something every time I go on a new ship. I present them OpenVDM and they come back to me with, but does it do this? Because our current system does this. And that usually leads to another functionality I get to incorporate in OpenVDM. So I'd be really curious to open the floor for discussion and what people are using. And yeah.
Great, thanks, Webb. And I will say that the integration with cloud is something that we've been discussing with Webb from the Australian Antarctic Data Center. You heard how we use S3, and we also have our integrations with the AWS Snowball devices. So we're interested in that potential push to cloud as well. Yeah, so again, a lot of potential integration here. In terms of other people besides us using OpenVDM or other things that people are using, as Webb said, do we want to have a quick around the room and some of the vessel managers to hear about what they're using, just as a point of discussion? So I'll put Cyro on the spot. What are you using OpenVDM or are you using something else?
No, we're using an in-house tool. It's a little bit similar, but it doesn't have as many features.
Yep.
Yes, so I'm interested in some of these features we don't have that we've considered building. So maybe we could use this, start integrating this with that, or use the two systems. But it's basically the file management. Doesn't do QA, does checksumming and all of that. And it has an API and web interface and those sorts of things. But yeah, we are missing a lot of those features that would be pretty attractive, I think, to us as well.
Yeah, and if we can co-develop, we'll continue to go around the room. But I also remembered at the end of this, it would also be interesting for us to, it's easy for us to put wish lists to Webb, but it would also be interesting to think about where we can contribute on our end, on our end as well. So Schmidt, do you use OpenVDM or something else?
We early adopters of the original OpenVDM as Webb mentioned, and
Yep.
still currently do, and are actively working with to increase those technologies. So as you said, if there are features that are interesting to the whole community, I think we could help prioritize those as well.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to gently put Masaki on the spot. Do you know if Jamstech have been thinking about what sort of data pipeline systems they'd be using? It's fair to say no, but I just didn't know if you knew.
I don't know actually.
Okay.
Practically, but I'm using some satellite communication to deliver the data to the Jamstech server.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they may be interested in trying to take advantage of the lean transfer, so that they're having to transfer smaller amounts of information. So it may be worth introducing them to the concept as well. Alex, from your perspective?
So we don't use OpenVDM, but we obviously do some similar functionalities based mainly around rsync for data synchronization from local acquisition machines through to the central storage. One thing that we did do, and I guess it's a question for Webb, is that we made a design decision to hold things natively at we call it the forever level. So all the instruments that we've got synchronize up to effectively to the platform level, and then we then create views, hard linked views that are the time-based cruise leg periods. So when you go on, so for simplicity's purposes, all of our multi-beam data just goes to a multi-beam area that extends forever from the start of the vessel all the way through to whenever it finishes. But cruise participants come and see a hard linked, time-bound version of that. So they get what they expect to see. But we don't have this stopping and starting of cruise legs. That said, some of the elements that were mentioned about starting cruises we do have, because we have to have a work area for scientists on board to be able to put their own files.
So it's an accumulation. So the view is continuous, but the accumulation is.
Well, the accumulation for the long-term systems on board the vessel go into a forever storage, and it is a time-bound view you see. So the question for OpenVDM is whether it allows that, or whether the paradigm is entirely cruise-based, as in processes start at the beginning of a cruise, persist, there's an end of cruise process, and then things start again, and everything is effectively / cruise leg ID.
So what your thoughts on that? Is everything discrete, or are there ways of, I guess, permuting in different views through the data?
Right. I mean, I will say that's a very interesting idea. I've never actually thought about organizing the data like that. I mean, I think the first thing to kind of clarify is that, OpenVDM doesn't have any control over these data acquisition systems. So in the case of like OpenRVDAS is a perfect example. On the ships that don't really care about changing OpenRVDAS from cruise to cruise for that file naming convention, that's really the primary reason to do that. If they just want to, if they, the files are always named, basically sensor timestamp.txt kind of thing. On those types of installations, the vessel operator can just let it rip. It can basically just be an always on. And from an OpenVDM standpoint, when you set up the transfer, you can actually tell the transfer, it's like, hey, I've defined the cruise as from this date to this date. I only want you to grab the data files that were modified or created within those temporal bounds. So you can set up your acquisition system to just always be running. And depending on how you configure OpenVDM at the cruise level, that'll inform OpenVDM of what files to call out, so that while natively on the acquisition system, it is a continuous file set. But as far as packaging the cruise data set within OpenVDM is only grabbing the files relevant to that particular cruise. That's a very popular feature in OpenVDM, especially for acquisition systems that are configured to just run. I mean, in terms of, hard linking, and if say you wanted to retroactively like rebuild that continuous file structure, that would have to be some type of post process. It could be simplified because OpenVDM does help provide consistency from cruise to cruise. Consistency is kind of the keystone behind automation, right? It's easy to automate something that is guaranteed to be in a particular format. So I could see being able to rebuild continuous per system data sets from per cruise data sets because of the consistency and because of the availability of the Open API. But that's a really interesting. I'd be really curious to see, and this is kind of a sidebar, I'd be really curious to see the users behind that, because when I think of this stuff, one of the first things that comes to mind is multi-beam data. And multi-beam processors, they want to see all the files. They want to process files at the survey level. They don't want to process files at the cruise level. They want to basically, it's like, okay, we surveyed this block of the ocean. I want to process that as a block. I might add that block to other blocks. But if you just gave me an entire directory of every file that we've created over the entire cruise, I don't want that, because I might need to tweak how I process from survey to survey if there were changes with the underlying system configuration. So I mean, that's actually kind of one of the first use cases. So I'd be really curious to hear and like I said, this might be a sidebar for another discussion, but I'd be really curious to hear on like the mapping side, for instance, how has that worked out? You know, just looking at a directory of files from multiple surveys in one and having to do the processing. Anyway.
All right. Did that answer what you're?
Just to answer that, I mean, we do replicate the survey directory structure. It just goes into a, let's assume it's a slash SDA slash multibeam.
It's a theme. It's a theme-based directory.
Yes, and they generally, when you've set up a survey, you've whatever survey you want to do, usually using some kind of Kongsberg acquisition software or whatever, that then gets replicated. That entire directory structure and all the files within get replicated. But it gets the synchronization takes it to the forever view, and it's the time-based element that then hard links it down to what you would see if you looked under slash data slash cruise leg.
Right.
Slash.
Okay. Now, how does
go ahead.
I was curious, like, how does that work in terms of customer data delivery? So, like, if you've got a science party that's like, you know, I'm just interested in the data from my particular cruise, I have to assume there's some type of export mechanism that removes all the hard links and just gives them only the called out file set for the current cruise or for the cruise in question.
But that hard link gives them, to them, they don't see the matrix. They just see the cruise.
Okay, so they're not. So you're not having to. So you're not having to provide physical media.
Well, yes, we do, but we just take that is a data backup of the cruise view that they get.
Okay. All right.
So at that point, I mean, hard links are effectively materialized, so it just materializes the cruise to them on a physical media.
Gotcha. Yep. Okay. All right. Yeah, that was a confusion on my part. Got it.
All right. So in terms of, so Webb talked about many of the different capabilities that OpenVDM can provide. So he also stressed that it's not the 0-in-1 writer. It's not OpenRVDAS, which we'll be hearing about later on. He talked about sort of the QA, talked about the transfer aspects of things, talked about the naming control aspects of things. In terms of management and access of data, though, are there things that, not necessarily OpenVDM, but things that you would want to see? Okay. Are there things that you would want to see something like OpenRVDAS do? Is this the tool that gets you everything that you want? Or would there be other things that you would be looking to see from a tool like OpenRVDAS?
OpenVDM.
Or sorry, that's my fault. OpenVDM. Sorry, Webb.
Yeah, no, you're not the first.
So I guess people would have to check out the framework, but again, give it some thought. But at this point,
I will say my hot take on the current user base is what I kind of outlined, where they want more cloud-based integration, multi-vehicle support. They want and better API controls. The vehicle support in the clouds are really those are like the two most requested, because once the techs come to depend on OpenVDM for the file management, when somebody brings a vehicle on board and they're asked to manage the data out of it, they really enjoy just being able to like pipe that instrument into OpenVDM and just let OpenVDM deal with it. And so now with user groups bringing on AUVs, they're like, okay, we want it. We want to add, not just time series. We want deployment, multi-vehicle deployment-based organization of data. We want to be able to do that. So that's the feedback that I've gotten from the current user group.
And you are starting to see this paradigm a lot more as well, in that you're seeing groups like Ocean Infinity using large arrays of ships to collect information, or small robotic fleets. And I think that as AI becomes a little bit more developed, you'll start to see multiple fleets taking on coordinated autonomous activities. This is happening in the drone space. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see this happening in the marine vehicle space. So I think that you're right, that this is something that you'll have to address sooner rather than later, is being able to account for these multiple fleets operating simultaneously and in concert. Tess, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I do. Firstly, thanks so much, Webb. That was, yeah, great talk. And also just thanks in the past for all your troubleshooting help. I know both Peter and I have really appreciated being able to reach out to you. And also just really appreciate OpenVDM.
Thank you.
So a couple of things that I guess that we've got, or a couple of questions I have on that. Is would you mind going over the QA with the R2R? I think you said it was called Nav Manager again, because I think that's something that we're hoping to extend the passes to include a couple more QA QCs. Like, I've got a list here, but yeah.
All right, yeah. So, not to derail the discussion, I will Google. I can't remember the name. It's like R2R Nav Manager is the name of the project. Right, so it was written in PHP, which for those of us who program can debate on whether or not PHP was the right platform to develop a command line utility in. But it can be called at the command line. And so what we do with OpenVDM is when a new GGA file comes in from OpenRVDAS, basically we add into the hook, I wrote a wrapper. There was a wrapper I wrote around R2R Nav Manager that this wrapper is passed the full manifest of files that came from OpenRVDAS into OpenVDM, and it calls out just the GGAs. And then it passes that list of GGAs to R2R Nav Manager with the necessary command line arguments. And as part of that wrapper, on the output side, it does some other file manipulations and whatnot. And then it will basically store the output of that where I want it to be located in the cruise data directory. And so you basically get this report, this QA report on nav data just appearing in the cruise data directory structure over the course of the cruise. So I've done it that way, and then I've also done it, if you really just want to check it at the end of the cruise, I've also wired it in to the end of cruise hook where it just runs once at the end. So yeah, so there's that. That's the nav manager side. If you wanted to develop your own QA tests, your own GGA QA tests, and actually if I can share my screen again, I might be able to, let's see. All right. All right. Can people see a web browser?
Yeah, we can see it.
So this is R2R. Okay, yeah. So this is R2R. I mean, no, sorry, this is OpenVDM, and that Roger Revell threw me off. So this is the data quality. So this is I talked about the plugin architecture where you can visualize the data sets. These are file level visualizations. This is different than real-time visualization. Pablo will probably talk about real-time visualization through the integration of OpenRVDAS with Influx and Grafana. But this is file level visualization. And so here we can visualize, here's a mix or whatnot, and that we can interact with, and we can zoom in and pan and all that stuff and turn off data sets and stuff like that. And this is based on file level stuff. So then we can very quickly kind of go to a different file and it loads, the next file and whatnot. As part of this process, though, as part of the processing the data to build these web-based visualizations, you can also piggyback onto that running QA tests. And when you do that and you build the schema the way that OpenVDM expects these data dashboard files to be written, and they're just a JSON file, they're really stupid, simple JSON file. The data quality tab in the data dashboard in OpenVDM will visualize all of this for you. And so basically what we have here, these are the individual tests. These are dynamic. You can run as many tests as you want. And then you have your outcome for a particular test. So for instance, here, we can see that these files passed all the way. They're QA tests. If we come down here to the MET sensor, we're getting some flags on the delta T. Delta T, that's just what I call a time gap. So basically if there's any gaps in the data, that's a delta T. And so if you're expecting data at 1 hertz and there's a 10-second gap, well, then that's just flagged as a potential data quality thing. But then using this, and if you utilize the OpenVDM QA structure, you can also collect stats. And so here, this is basically the stats that have been summarized from that particular file that give things, it checks whatever you want. This isn't something, I'm not using any type of one size fits all thing. These are all bespoke to the actual data set itself. So if I recognize no two ships are the same. I've learned to believe that no two NEMA messages of the same type are the same. My experience. And so this gives the vessel operator the ability to vary at whatever granularity they want to take it, to be able to run the QA tests that they want to run, to collect the statistics, the file level statistics they want to run, and through the OpenVDM mechanism, and have this ability to very quickly see the checks and to be able to visualize the checks. And the underlying data behind this is JSON. So if you wanted to do a much more comprehensive QA analysis, these are all machine readable files. So it's collect it once, do it multiple times. And the schema for doing the QA tests and the statistics collection, there's a little bit of an intelligence. There's an archetype of types of checks and stats that you collect. And what those types give you the ability to do is it gives you the ability to kind of tell OpenVDM, here's how to deal with those types on a multi-file level. So here I'm looking at the show totals for both of the files that were created. And so now it knows where to sum, where to expand. So I know now that, okay, both files were good. Here is the beginning and end of the cumulative file set. These are the min and max for both files, the validity of both files, the geographic bounds of both files. And, this one's actually a real popular one because in this case, because it's GGA specifically, I'm summing distances traveled. So like, for instance, at the end of a cruise, you want to know, well, how far did we go that cruise? Well, you can just go to show totals on GGA and you can be like, well, we went this far. And so that's, but all that's done just through writing the plugins for OpenVDM to either use a third-party QA tool like Open or like a RV Nav Manager, or developing your own bespoke tests. And you just wire that in to OpenVDM via a YAML configuration file. And every time a transfer for that particular collection system transfer is run, the manifest of new or updated files that were transferred at that transfer are then passed downstream to whatever QA tool you want to use. And you can run multiple QAs. That's the other thing. So for instance, if you want to run one QA tool for one particular purpose, and you also want to run a second QA tool for another purpose, that's not a problem. Just add the two tools independently as an array to the YAML file, and it'll run them both after every transfer.
Yep, and I can confirm that it's pretty flexible. When I was aboard New Unit with Tess, we wrote some stats files for a variety of our sensors. So yeah, you can actually do it in a number of ways. Go ahead, Webb. Are you you have another page up?
No,
Okay.
I had it clicked the homepage to see if anything was failing. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, PTSD.
So the other thing that I said before is that turnabout is fair play. We can, it's easy for us to ask Webb for all of these things and go through a wish list. But Webb, I'm going to turn it back to you and say, if you were to make requests of the user community to help us help you, what would your requests be of us? Things that we could provide support with, or things that we should be looking at developing, or things that we might do on our end to act as a better community?
Okay. Probably the number one request there, and actually that was the last word that you used, is community. More often than not, I'll get on a vessel and I'll see a very creative workaround for something that I easily could have corrected that exists, and someone spent a lot of time just because they didn't think to ask, hey, is it possible to do this? Or what is your recommendation for accomplishing this type of goal? So I think the biggest request I can make is that the community continues to be a community. Pablo and I have had multiple discussions about a phenomenon that I see across all research vessels, more so in the texts that were around before the internet. But for the most part, and I guess the high latitude boats, it probably still is applicable. We've all been to sea. That is a high pressure environment where we are asked, oftentimes sleep deprived and in the middle of the night, to solve very complex problems. We invest a lot of ourselves into these solutions. We pride ourselves on being creative problem solvers, and I think that's why we've gotten so much innovation across the board. But it also, in some cases, it does us. We're doing ourselves a disservice. I think reaching out more, discovering more about what other groups are doing, reaching out to developers, and before we figure out how to hack a solution, why don't we first ask the developer, hey, here's a problem I'm encountering. Do you have any ideas for how we could solve this problem? And I think that would do two things. I think one, I think it would save a lot of not wasted effort, but spent effort engineering workarounds as opposed to just fixing the root problem. But two, I think everybody would benefit from coming back to the developer with feedback, with feature requests that start discussions so that we can really distill the signal from the noise. I run into a lot of vessels that are ultimately trying to solve the same problem, but each vessel calls it something different, or the problem that they're trying to fix is manifesting itself in a different way. And it's really through the collaboration of multiple vessels that I really start to see the patterns emerge. I've been incredibly lucky that I've worked with dozens of programs, dozens of ships. Everyone has their own little tweak, and everyone has their, a plethora of things to teach me about how to do this job better. And it's through my experiences working with as many people as possible and kind of helping to foster a community, have we been able to make the strides that OpenVDM and OpenRVDAS and CLOG have made. So like my number one request, from the community to improve a tool for the community is to focus on being a community and to take advantage of the fact that we're not islands in the stream anymore like we used to be with super low bandwidth. Yes, we'll go through periods of no bandwidth, but with things like Starlink and the proliferation of satellite communication, we really should be taking advantage that help is an email or a text message away. And so, yeah, that would be my number one request.
Oh, fantastic. And developer resources are fairly limited. And I don't know anyone here who would say, oh, I have plenty of developers, just send them back. And so we don't want to be reinventing the wheel or working on, the same problems. Noting that, there are a lot of commonalities. Yes, there are individual circumstances, but, I think that there are definitely consistent patterns that we can work on and then, tailor individual solutions. Without looking to be a salesperson or giving government endorsement, I will vouch that you probably heard from Tess. She's reached out on a number of occasions to both Webb and De Pablo Cohn, and they've been very receptive in terms of helping out. So just take note that you've heard it from the man himself. If you have things that you want to talk about, then you shouldn't be shy about it. At the very least, discuss it and don't try and do everything on your own. So he's even going so far, dangerous to put his email, website, and Discord up there. And if not there, there's WhatsApp and Slack. So he has no excuse anymore for being unreachable. But yeah, he has been, I will say, as somebody on the outside, he's been very generous with his time. So I think this speaks to, he said this at the very beginning, he does want to help. He has a genuine passion for it. So, you know, we don't need to be reinventing the wheel. We should be looking at pooling our effort. So, yes, questions, Alex?
So on that then, Webb, if you stopped developing this evening, who would take it on? You said you want to have a community, but in reality, who would take it on if you didn't do it?
That's a great question, and that was actually something when I posted my thing about OpenVDM 3 that I should have included. Yeah, right now I'm definitely a single point of failure. The good news is sort of a medical issue. I don't plan to go anywhere. But to the root of there is no development team, and Pablo and I have actually talked about this as well.
That's
at
actually
length.
going to be part of my on my wish list near the end of our session, or near the end of the OpenRVDAS session. That's one of the slides is how do we create basically an institution behind these open tools to ensure survivability. So it's an excellent question, and what we don't solve here, I'm hoping to solve in our session.
Let's I mean, I'm happy to bookmark that for your session, Pablo, so we don't have the same conversation twice. I mean, long story short, I have no need to be the lone developer. I'm not that, married to the idea that I alone write 100% of the code for OpenVDM. I don't need to be that person. I'd be happy to have a bench, that helps me, keep the project going into perpetuity. And I'll say it now, and we'll hopefully expand on Pablo. I'd be curious from an organizational standpoint with what Pablo and I are doing. Is there something that can we change how our operation is structured so that it opens up mechanisms for more people to contribute time and resources to keeping the project going. Right now, it's a domain name registration, Open Data Tools. Do we need to go somewhere with that to open up the door to get additional resources on board that we can draw upon and when we need to for more intense development efforts, or when we need to bring more players to bear. So yeah, but I'll leave it at that, and hopefully we'll expand on that in Pablo's session. But to your point, I think I kind of started this with the idea of, or Pablo and I started this with the idea of community. A community of two, yeah, it's kind of weak. So expanding the core development team would be great. We have talked about if the funding came through, the first person that we would hire is a DevOps guy to help us harden the code bases for simplified deployment, security updates, etc. We've talked about that at length. That would be like the first person we would try to bring on if we ever reach the point that we could bring on somebody in a full time or even just part time, because the updates really aren't that frequent. But the rest of the discussion I'll leave for Pablo's session. But yes, it is something Pablo and I are both aware of on all three of the projects. And yes, we are interested in having discussions on what can the community do to make this project something that the community can depend on, because it doesn't constitute single point failures.
And it isn't a unique problem in the software world. There is a need to build communities around it, and I think that part of it is identifying that there is an ongoing need. And, there is a stable base to work on. And there's a degree of commitment behind it. And then, trying to identify the resources that we can put against it. But I think that part of it is getting that agreement that it's a good thing, that it's a useful thing, and that it's something that we want to support in the long term.
I can tell you the US fleet, I can't get into specifics, but there's interest in the not-for-profit community and in the UNOL's fleet to do in this endeavor as well, to shore up what Pablo and I have started into something that isn't a single point of failure, is something that can be depended on into the future. So don't feel like we'll be talking about something that is only something that this community is interested in. There is broader interest. It just hasn't reached critical mass yet.
Yeah, and I think that that's part of what we're looking to get at here is, even if we don't solve it, but to be able to add to that critical mass. Okay, additional questions for Webb? No? If not, I think we did allot some time, but I think our next break is at 3, but I wouldn't mind giving people a little bit of a chance to maybe stretch their legs, walk around, and then we would come back for, I believe it is 3:20 that we would be entering into the session with Dave Pablo Cohen. Even though I realize that he's online, I don't want to shift the sessions in case somebody's coming in for that specific time. So we'll stay on time, but maybe give everybody a little bit of a chance to rest up. Does that sound good?
Yep, and I'll stay online as well if anybody has any additional questions that they come up with on this, or if anybody has any questions on C-Log, just to fill the time. I've blocked out the next 20 minutes or 30 minutes of my life, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that I can.
Okay, now's your chance. But in the interim, I'll say thank you very much, Webb. Your generous offer of time is much appreciated, and I'm sure that many of us, at least, will continue working with you on this going forward. So thank you again, and David Pablo Cohen will be catching up with you soon.
All right, thank you,
Sounds
Jonathan.
good. See y'all in an
Okay.
hour.
Sounds good.
Shall I keep the recording going?
I think we'll stop the recording, but Dave, if anybody comes up with something wild and woolly, just let us know and we'll try and make a note of it. Yep. All right, thank you, everybody. So welcome back for